Hi, I'm Susan Bokern from ProQuest, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I've really enjoyed the discussions in the last 2 days, and it's been really interesting for me to hear all the different perspectives, because I've worked in the federal government and also in the news media, and news media meaning you're thinking forward, you're not thinking backwards in terms of preservation or archives. And frankly, when I was in the government, we didn't think forward. I mean, we thought forward, we didn't think backwards either in terms of preserving the content. So it's been really interesting to hear the different perspectives today. So it was a mindset change for me when I left sort of the media business and then moved into sort of the preservation and archival business, because it is a different mindset to think about. So when I joined ProQuest, I really was working with the group that collects the government content, and that's really in a variety of different ways that we present and collect and create products out of government content. So I'll give you, when Bernie asked me to talk, I don't want to sit here and just give you a laundry list of products we create. That didn't make sense. So I really started thinking about what are all the roles. I'm not sure if I got this right. There we go. As we've heard the last couple of days, I mean, there's just volumes and volumes of content, whether it's in digital form or whether it's in microfiche form or print form, etc. And we all play different roles. And all those roles are important, and there's enough information and content to go around for all of us to play a role together and work together. And particularly at ProQuest, I was thinking about, what if you strip down, what is our essential role? And our essential role really is to create value. It's to create value. Otherwise, we really don't have a role to play. So I'll talk a little bit about that value and the thinking behind that value, and kind of our thinking for going in the future of creating future value. And also we have to constantly, keep updating our functionality, our technology capabilities, etc., to meet, emerging research needs and expectations. When we look at the role of government, I mean, essentially, to me, the role of government is to create and disseminate information. Although I find it very ironic in this day of open government initiatives that we're also seeing the federal government and state governments ceasing to create content. So it's this, this irony that's happening. Agencies aren't producing reports anymore. Government's taking down content from its websites, and when they take it down, it's gone. And through the federal sequestration processes, will happen again, and content's is lost. And frankly, during sequestration, each agency did its own thing. Some kept it up, some suspended content, some delayed it, some discontinued it, some just ceased producing it or posting it. It was kind of a hodgepodge of activity and not coordinated. And we're looking at the government's role. We're looking at our statistical products, and we've been creating, obtaining content from our statistical series and compendia from the various government agencies back to the 1970s. And we've collected and preserved that content. And we go back to government websites, and government's not creating this content anymore. And particularly with the outcry among you, the library community, a couple of years ago, when the Census Bureau ceased producing the statistical abstract of the U.S. So government's making a lot of decisions, some based on policy, some based on political decisions, and some just plain because of budgetary cuts. So even the Census Reform Act, even the American Community Survey, is really up for discussion to be cut. And part of the reason why is the data collection process is costly. It's costly for the government to create the content. It's increased 1,300% just in the last 50 years. And as we've heard today, and our table demonstrates, that the federal staffing levels are flat. It's not growing. So the government doesn't have the capability to create the content anymore that it used to create. So I look at this and I look at the context for us too, because if it doesn't exist, we don't have the content either, as well as libraries. And I always, when I'm looking at the framework of our role, I'm really looking at keep focused and keep our focus. And our focus really is on our researchers and on our improving and helping them improve the workflow processes to help them discover and find and gather and store and create new research output. And frankly, that's where our value has to come in. And I'll talk a little bit about that. We get asked, well, how do we create what we create in our various products? And really, it begins with market research. We go out and talk to students, we talk to faculty, we talk to you librarians. We don't do this in a vacuum. We can't afford to do that in a vacuum. It's not our role has to be to create that value. So we have various, focus groups and discussions and surveys, etc., about what are the needs, what are the untapped needs, what are the unknown needs, what are the clear needs, etc. And depending upon that need, we look at, we discuss about an acquisition strategy, about collecting. Are we preserving the content? Are we just providing an index to it? What are we trying to achieve? And what kind of technology do we need to do to make it accessible and available? And we also have to know where to go obtain the content, which source locations to obtain it. Libraries, we look at libraries actually around the world where we obtain content, and I'll touch a little bit about that later. And for example, with the executive branch documents product line we created, it's from 100 source libraries to piece together all the pieces from 1789 to 1932. We're looking at moving that forward from 33 forward to at least 45, and again, it's piecing together where that content is, because frankly, it's not sitting in one place. It's not sitting at the federal government in one place. It's not sitting at NARA in one place. It's not sitting at any individual agency at one place. And as we work through this process, we also establish, criteria, and the criteria varies. When we look at some of the collections, it's comprehensive. And we look at other collections, and we're looking at the selective content, such as our statistical content, but we try to be complete when it comes to specific series and reports over time. And then we also look at what we deem as relevant content from data, particularly from statistical offices around the world, and their statistical offices, and then also their data offices, which are different, and it's different content and different material. And in other cases, we're just looking to create the most comprehensive index that we can, but it's never complete. To date, and in the past, we've really had more of a collection mindset, and it's kind of paralleled the library mindset of collecting, and we're changing that a little bit going into the future, so I'll take you along that path in a minute. To date, we've kind of calculated, and we've got over 100 million government pages, mostly in the U.S., although we also archive the House of Commons and Parliament, and our content from DNSA, as you heard Tom speak yesterday, and we add value to that product line. And really, the key here is that we've got more than 100 staff that really work with government content and think about government content. We have the old-timers with 35 years plus of experience, and I was thinking about the conversation earlier today. We also have the young staff, and going forward, I'm hiring more and more young staff, because it's the young staff who really are more in tune with our researchers than we are, and the young staff creating new ways of making the content useful and valuable. We really have developed in certain areas great editorial expertise, and also the expertise when we look at values such as our legislative histories product. It's really working in that particular one, working to fill a need for law schools, because essentially it not only teaches the legislative process, but saves time. We've had researchers tell us it would take them 2 weeks to go piece that together and piece the content together to create a legislative history on Obamacare or on, these big programs on financial reform, etc. So what has really changed? Our users have changed. Our researchers have changed. You've heard, Matt Connolly. He's a young, new hotshot historian and faculty. He's thinking digitally. He's thinking differently. Your students have changed. They're born digital. 1996, the internet, they're digital. You mentioned the microfiche you formed to a student. They're like, whoa, you want me to do what? Whoa, what's that? I mean, we're even having, an issue with them. Students looking at A&I. It's like, whoa, where's the article? You want me to go trace a trail somewhere? Whoa, go ask the librarian to go find it somewhere? Whoa, I'm sitting in my dorm room. I'm at the university center. And we're finding that researchers really want to get their hands dirty, these kids who are digital. They want to work with data. They're not just looking at statistical reports and analysis that someone else has written. Very important, but they also want to get to the data itself. And in teaching today, there's moving along the continuum, they're teaching classes on quantitative reasoning and analysis so that they have the skill sets when they leave school in those areas. And also, it's not about the document anymore. Yes, the document's very important, don't get me wrong. But it's new creative things that you can do with the document, as you saw in Matt Connolly's examples. And for us, I'm really thinking about how do we enable, the researchers to access and work with the materials in a different way through technology, and providing them, with ways to improve their workflow process. In the past, just think about it, almost 70% of a researcher's time was spent on discovering, finding, gathering, collecting, storing, figuring out what to do with the material. Oh, by the way, now I have 30% of my time to actually go do the analysis and create the report and the output of it. We probably get 10 calls a week from faculty on visualization, requests for visualization. That's just in my group. Across ProQuest, it's probably 100 to ask for analytics and data mining and etc. And we're looking at different business models to put content in cloud-based services so that they can go and select the content that they need for their specific research project. So as I look at the new roles for us, even with our congressional content, it's not about the content itself, it's also about the context. So with all the data that we have coming in, we have, all the votes back to 1789. We can do time analysis, time series, text analysis. We can match votes up to FEC content that we have in that matches, all of the election campaign contributions. We can match it to all the relationships. We can even match it to Twitter tweets that some, congressman's saying in his or her district, and their blogs back to what they say in the congressional record. Are they saying the same thing? We can look at the congressional record and do word analysis. What's the word analysis of the day in the record? What's the word analysis over time? These are the things that we're hearing from our researchers and users, that they want to be able to work with the material. And on the data side, they want to answer a lot of questions in a variety of ways. When we took over creating the statistical abstract of the U.S., I asked the staff, really, do we have the expertise to do that? And it turns out, yes, for several reasons. One, we went and met with the census staff, so we just didn't create this from scratch. And we really worked through their methodologies and talked to them. We hired one of them, Lars Johansson, the former bureau chief who works with us now as a consultant. But we also asked what would they want to do with the content that they couldn't do, because they produced a print edition. So we really created an electronic edition and the print edition so that, again, you could get to the information quicker. And now we're looking at adding the historical statistics. Actually, I think it's 1878. And also to start looking at all the breadcrumbs that are in here that link back to federal government content, some of which we've already stored. So we have the content, and some we would have to go find. That's a big task. And then we started getting questions about, well, gosh, they want information not just from the U.S. Kids are global now. They're mobile. They're global. They're not just U.S. centric anymore. So they're thinking about around the world, how do I compare the U.S. to another country in population, labor, business, the economy, AIDS. So we really started digging, and we're building this capability now, and we know we need to build a lot more content into the product line. But the kids want to really look at not just the data, but compare it. They want to be able to output it in different ways, charts and graphs and forms and data and maps and etc. So it's a whole new world, and we're trying to play in it. And if you were to go to, let's say, Stats India, I mean, really? How would you go on this website and go find the data and go back and compare it here and go find the data that's just about creating a business, how to start a business? So it saves time in that workflow process, and I see my time is up. We can talk about some of my other points during our conversation. And I just wanted to, just touch on, kind of think about what the roles of government are, because should they preserve the content? Should they be the creators of finished reports, or should they just be providing all of us with the raw data and content for us to then go create reports? Think about the whole role of open access. When researchers create content, they're giving it back to the government. Okay, who's going to store that content? Where's that going to go? And what role as librarians and do we have in that storage? And roles for librarians. One of the ones that I'll challenge you, and I'll leave you with this, a lot of the faculty are approaching aggregators like us, and they're bypassing the librarians. When we worked with Bob Connolly at Columbia University, we actually went to Bob Scott, the librarian, and brought him involved in the conversation. So that's another role we can talk about during our discussion. And then lastly, I'll just leave you with some of the things I'm thinking about in open data, and also to challenge the librarians. The role of government docs librarians is disappearing. So what role, really, are librarians playing in the government docs field when a lot of those positions are being lost and being moved to the reference edition? So there's plenty of room for all of us to play together and think of new business models and partnering, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about digital, but I'm going to largely use the analog here to support my talk. That's right. Also available in microfiche. My name is Robert Lee. I'm from Eastview Information Services, and to follow James' theme, call me Ishmael, please. I'd like to start by adding my thanks to Bernie and to the CRL staff and colleagues for organizing what I think is really a top-shelf event with some really interesting presenters and attendees and questions raised. If nothing else is a takeaway from our time here together, I hope we collectively all have a sense of strong job security as we try to wade through this for the next several years or decades. When I fly, I tend to always be over I guess I fly a lot too, to be the guy sitting over the wing of the airplane, and once again I find myself between you and lunch, so I'll try to be mercifully quick in my remarks. Okay, well, my role and the role of my company, Eastview, is pretty different from the perspectives that have been presented from the other speakers so far. And to an extent, I'm actually envious of some of the problems that have been described, because these are problems from people with a clear mandate, working on the problems of a single government with serious infrastructure, daunting tasks, but serious infrastructure and mandates and funded programs. Eastview is kind of like a bee cross-pollinating the GovDoc needs of researchers in this country and in the Western world, mostly from Russia, the former Soviet Union, China, and places like the Middle East, North Korea, etc. So the challenges are quite different. And of course, to do this, our base of operations is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, of all places. most of what we do, which is fortunate for me, it's my hometown, most of what we do does not focus on U.S. created content or even English language content, which is a whole other set of problems and challenges. And also, for those of you in this audience who know us, you probably know us as a provider of aggregated databases in academic space, but a strong aspect of what we do is that we service the needs of clients in academic and in government. And also, when we say government, we serve on a special project basis and a big data procurement basis the governments of European countries, Japan, Israel, and other friendly nations. And this includes more mundane data types like statistical output of foreign governments, mapping and GIS data. This is what we include in our definition of government documentation. Increasingly, big data projects, which can be quite interesting. And then some really esoteric activity, such as the collection of ephemera from political rallies, contested election campaigns in places like Kiev or Baku or Tbilisi. We actually have people on the ground who obtain election reports from both sides, from the government side, from the campaign side. Emerging democracies output such as police brochures and protester brochures documenting their kind of vague legal boundaries, what you can or can't do when you're arrested. And that's really interesting in a place like Minsk. And since our biggest, we work with many countries, but our biggest focus is Russia and the FSU and China, so I'll focus on these geographies a little bit. First, some really obvious factors. Russians tend to produce data in Russian, and the Chinese tend to produce a lot of output in Chinese. So we're not seeking translations. Normally, we're not producing translations, although that is some part of the activity that we do. Which, of course, from a commercial perspective, is a huge limiting factor. Harvard University, how many FTEs and how many read Chinese? It's not the whole whack. On the other hand, we're going after the bigger, deeper, more authoritative, more expediently produced troves of information in the vernacular, which are not always so available or obvious through the pruned and selected English language face that governments present about themselves overseas. Certainly, if you wanted to know what's going on in Pyongyang, the Pyongyang Times is not your best source of information. And the other factor, of course, is that it would be quite generous to characterize Russia or China as societies with a strong democratically minded approach to government document release. Again, job security for those of us at EastU working on these problems. EastU was actually founded in the cinders of Soviet collapse. Our first projects came through direct mandates from the federal government to build databases to help them understand what's going on, how do we access this content, and trying to keep up with the rapid and sometimes vague process of mass declassification. There was a government that had whole classes of information that were verboten. All of a sudden those laws were invalidated. Who's going to scoop up the data, supply it to our analysts and folks, make sure it gets preserved, make sure that the academic audience has access as well. And that's really the cradle that EastU grew up into. And then about 12 years ago, EastU, I think, made a very wise decision that the former Soviet Union is, of course, important, but the new flavor of the month is China. And so we parlayed our expertise in working with a collapsing post-Soviet communist transition to an emerging, still communist society, which has very similar themes of how government information is restricted and structured, and has similar themes in terms of how vernacular information needs to be handled and made useful for consumption by government and academic consumers. It's probably interesting to note that in the Russian case in particular, we dance in a bit of a gray area. Here we talk about open doors. In Russia, declassification works a little bit more like a slappy screen door in a windstorm. It goes back and forth, and that creates a degree of operational risk for an outfit like ours. We are on the receiving end of information which retroactively could be reclassified. We have a few hundred employees in Moscow and Kiev and other further flung places. Sometimes there are legal risks for even the ministerial or commercial employees in country who are doing their jobs legally and transparently, but because of the whimsy of Russian legislation or inconsistent interpretation, there are risks involved. And Vladimir Putin has been doing his darndest recently to remind us that Russia does not always fit our definitions of predictable, logical, cooperative, transparent, etc. Last year, we worked with Yale to produce the Stalin archive. Right now, we are still producing elections reports, and we actually discreetly assemble ephemera from the floor of the Russian parliament. We get the committee and meeting agenda notes and the daily dockets. It's part of the activity we engage in. In China, the environment is quite different and deceptively more attractive. And I say deceptively because, on the one hand, it's almost unfortunate that we don't have Chinese colleagues here, or that a session like this isn't held in China, because the degree of organization and serious government funding in digitization efforts is nothing short of breathtaking. Just leave it to China. If they need to move 1 million people to build a dam, they just do it. And if they want to create a massive archive of party records or city planning documents or patents or regulations or what have you from multiple sources, some kind of wand just seems to get waved, and these things are built about as quickly as Americans build subdivisions in the suburbs. However, that's a really superficial impression of data in China. It reminds me a little of my high school jazz ensemble. Bear with me. As it happens, B.B. King's nephew was the drummer in my jazz ensemble, and this guy, Michael Bland, who went on to be Prince's drummer for a number of years, had perfect pitch. And it drove our band leader nuts that the one guy in a school of 3,000 people with perfect pitch plays drums. Yeah. And in Eric Peterson's presentation, actually, I found a more salient example with Major League Baseball. I was thinking, wow, what a great effort behind the wrong content. So the Chinese do present a great case study in terms of methods and possibilities, but it belies, of course, the unfortunate lack of transparent access to very important types of information that we are waiting and prodding to get at. So there is no Thomas Blanton in China. We're gathered here today, and there is no symposium like this where best practices and dreams and challenges are frankly and openly discussed in a forum between government employees and librarians and information officers. It just doesn't exist. I probably attend more library industry conferences in China than the United States, and while it's all very interesting, this does not exist in that society, and certainly not in Russia either. Furthermore, Chinese government data is susceptible to 2 additional levels of instability, which we simply forego in a context talking about U.S. information. We talk about, okay, you don't have to publish through the GPO, you don't have to deposit, but in China, there's a more conscious making of materials unavailable. Materials frequently disappear retroactively, selectively, depending on the whim of the day, both within the databases that are created. So none of the actors that we work with are truly independent organizations, and so when they get a tap on the shoulder that the articles relating to Boshilai are not favored right now, they go away. On top of that, there's the Great Firewall, which is completely separate from and uncoordinated with censorship, let's just call it what it is, with database publishing itself. And so if there's a flare-up in U.S. relations or Japan relations, or there's the Party Congress or something like that, search terms can be disrupted or wholly unavailable, which affects the ability of foreign-based researchers to effectively conduct basic research on materials that are sitting on servers in China. And that directly characterizes our mission. We get it out, we put it on our servers, in our products, and if we're doing our job, it's like the proverbial roach motel. Chinese and Russian government data check in and they don't check out. Okay. And quickly ahead, looking into the frontiers of what we'd like to do, we've all been doing textual resources for a very long time. That's been the focus of what libraries and governments and publishers do. We are turning our attention and interest, without any solutions, to broadcasting. And broadcasting for us includes the websites, which are a live publication, so to speak, as well as TV and radio. And we do some of this activity, actually North Korea and Serbia are the most active areas of that activity for us right now. That's about it. A couple quick reactions to other presentations. Also, Thomas Blanton noticed cited the imperative of capturing data, and not only Thomas, capturing data further upstream as it's born digitally. On the China front, again, there's an enviable process for this. In China, the relationship between the academic community and academic publishers and the central government is really more akin to the way the federal government and the various agencies coordinate. It's not like our environment where there are privately owned actors who are publishers and universities with their own latitude. So they're able to consolidate things into a central database, which creates a de facto national standard for pre-press submissions. And one wonders if a similar model could be applied to that kind of capture and submission for government documentation. I think I'm out of time, so I'll keep it brief from here, but thank you all again for your interesting presentations and questions.
Good morning, and thank you to the organization. Thank you to the organization, to Bernie, for the invitation. My name is Robert Dessau. I am the founder and CEO of voxgov. It's probably one of the oldest new companies that a lot of you would not have heard of, and that's because I was for many years rolling around in government data to try to work out how it could be presented in the area we are in the area we're focused on in an intelligible way. The goal of voxgov is to track and map the conversation going on in the U.S. federal government throughout all stages. So it starts with the policy and political, watching the policy and political commentary all the way up through the legislative and regulatory process. And the interesting thing we have discovered is that very little focus has been placed on the early stage prior to the legislative or regulatory process. A great deal of that data exists in digital form increasingly since the early 2000s, and we started collecting data as early back as 2002. A lot of that data was unusable for a variety of reasons. One, we didn't know what we were doing, and two, we discovered neither did the government. And when we worked that out, we set about trying to solve a very, very big problem, which was how to collect from thousands of government web locations in a coherent way. As to what led me into this pursuit, something my family has asked on more than one occasion. I came from a background in law, but in the late 90s I was consulting to Australian technology companies wanting to sell to the US federal government, and interestingly the US federal government bid site was then and still was a pretty good site, and I thought this would be a relatively easy matching of the technologies which were targeted at government with the bids by the government. It took me a while to appreciate that the government bid process was really the end of the story, and while we had a very good story to tell the government, others had already been there and told them and had significant lead and influence when it came to winning bids. But at that stage I was not ready to give up so easily, because I discovered that press releases and speeches and all sorts of fascinating documents resided on government websites. And it occurred to me, if you could read enough of these, you could probably find something that these companies would find useful. And sure enough, I would spend long hours reading mostly irrelevant material, but every now and again stumbling across a release that signaled an agency's early interest in solving a problem. And the value of that was clearly to be able to relay it to the partner that I was working with the potential solution. Was all the government documents that I read of interest? A lot seemed absolutely useless, irrelevant, and so on. But over time, I came to appreciate that clearly to one person or another, this material held both its archival and new material added up to something of potential value. As time went on and I got very tired of the late nights going through the documents, it occurred to me that this broad base of material could be applied very differently than to bids. And that was, what if we could track the conversation from beginning to end? This was something which hadn't been done. I don't think it's been done to a significant degree today. And it's something we embarked on, blissful in our ignorance, as I said. Today, what we actually do is harvest from materials from over 10,000 web destinations each day. We go out on 6-minute intervals looking for any new URL in the range we are collecting. Our materials come from 49 different types of documents, which include press releases, just to give you a few, speeches, transcripts, interviews, fact sheets, blogs, articles, right through to social media, to congressional documents, as well as Federal Register. And the collection part, as complex as it is, and it is, it has evolved greatly. We know very rapidly when a government website is down. We know when the URL is broken. We know when it comes back. We have learned to identify when a website's format has changed. That may not sound a great achievement, but it makes a huge difference, because maintaining quality intake of the data is a major ongoing challenge. Just relating to broken links from government, I think James mentioned that one study showed 51% of particular sites fell within that group. We find that 18 to 22%, depending on which group we're studying, of our data falls into broken link category. That is no longer available. And in our case, that would account for 2 million of our 10.4 million documents. We have a very much lower rate than his, I suspect, because of our early warning system, so that when we see on a daily basis a site has stopped being reached, we go and look why, and sometimes immediately we find it's been relocated, and in other times the government can take weeks or months to reactivate, or not at all to reactivate its URLs. The task, as I say, is to collect and collate, and we do a great deal of tagging of the material coming in. We know who it is coming from. In the case of members of Congress, we know parties, districts, gender. We will be adding race and ethnicity very shortly. We allow a great deal of filtering and drill down through all of these facets. We extract entities at the time of every document coming into the system. So keywords, names mentioned, organizations mentioned, and places mentioned are all aggregated as part of the process, along with categorization of each document using a three-way process for our categorization. The documents, as I say, are varied across 49 different types, and the challenge we have found is to present these in a single interface where users can multi-select from any combination of these, either materials or the facets, to see the results, particularly of their choosing. And the job so far, I think, has yielded pretty promising results. We differ to some of the more established resources that you'll be very familiar with, in that only about 15% of our documents, the congressional documents, the federal system, the Federal Register documents, are largely what we share in common. Beyond that, I think if you are looking at a CEQ or a BGov, there is a major difference in the content. From the researcher's perspective, and some of the researchers you are all familiar with, or some of you are familiar with, have found the data particularly interesting. It's opened up the possibility for them to draw conclusions which were not available to them prior, particularly seeing early in the process of lawmaking what was being said by whom, by sources, by groups, is allowing investigation of data which is of extreme interest, we are finding, to the researcher. And I think the fact that the documents are made contemporaneously, with the speakers make these at a time prior to knowing the outcome of where the issue is leading, gives researchers the potential to track, and in some cases to predict, and for others possibly to influence what the outcome of policy and political debate will lead to. I think I've mentioned that the providing long-term access to our data is pretty well assured as far as preserving broken link documents. To go to the ongoing demand, or the growing demand as we see it, for third-party services, I think it's inevitable, and I think as government releases more documents and more information to the public, it's going to fall inevitably onto the private sector to add value to this in a way which is usable for research purposes. It certainly is not a government job, and I don't see waiting any amount of time is going to change that. Our own focus is on mining the text we have, which is considerable, bringing a great deal of value that has not been realized to date out of that. And we have data scientists resources joining us in the very near future, which will have a very big impact on what our data will show over and above what it already does. There was a question we were asked to address on the long-term long-term integrity of social media, which I don't know if others have addressed, but the interesting thing to me about it is, if any of you have read the terms of service of your Twitter or Facebook accounts, you'll find you have no assurances whatsoever about the long-term integrity of it. But it does beg an interesting question, I've always thought, as to if it was to be removed, what would fair use amount to with a 140 character tweet? And presumably it would have to come remarkably close. The final comment that I would like to make is that regardless of which way I look at it, with the impossibility of government giving the data it owns the research capability it deserves, I think it's inevitable that businesses such as ours and these will be your partners. And I can tell you already we have had enormous help and guidance from Columbia and from Harvard and others, influencing what it is that they want to see in the data. And I'd really encourage you all, whether it's with us or with any of the vendors that you are dealing with, to view us very much more as partners. At times, I don't think that's the initial reaction, but I think there are rewards to be gained by that. So I hope that falls on receptive ears, and be very happy to answer any questions as well. Thank you.